Good afternoon, all. It gives us immense pleasure to extend a very warm welcome to you all at the technical section of the International Visitor Conference on Gender Studies. I'm Fatma Nisham and I will be your moderator for this section. I welcome Jalsi Abraham, Assistant Professor, Department of English, BK College. Uh, she is a research scholar of MG University and organized various seminars, being resource person of various international and national journals, volunteer faculty in Community College. Welcome, ma'am, to the section. I also welcome all the participants to the section. Here are a few guidelines that participants should keep in mind. Paper presentation are requested to keep the time limit of 10 to 12 minutes for their paper presentation. Participants are requested to post their questions indeed for the Q&A section in the chat box. Over to you, ma'am.
Yes, thank you, Fatima. I welcome all the paper presenters to this session, to the 10th technical session. And we have four paper presenters today. And the first paper presentation is
Your screen share.
Am I audible? Hello?
Yes, ma'am, you are
Yes,
audible.
ma'am, you are audible.
Okay, fine. Yep. So the first paper presentation is going to be by, it is a paper that has been co-authored by Dr. Asma Rahman Punjabi and Dr. Rana Shawl. So I invite Dr. Asma to present her paper. All the best.
Thank you so much, ma'am. This is Dr. Asma Rahman from Department of Law, University of Kashmir. So far as the title of my paper is concerned, it is Gender Justice and the Law. I would like to start my paper with the quote of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. Quote, "You can tell the condition of a nation by looking at the status of its women." Unquote. Gender injustice means injustice on the basis of sex. But in practice, the story is different. In the case of injustice to women, it's women only, except the rape cases. In kinds of injustice as domestic violence, forced abortion, detection of sex, dowry death extra, behind this there are more roles of the woman than men. Gender equality is more than a goal in itself. It's precondition for meeting the challenge of reducing poverty, prompting sustainable development, and building good governance. This recognition is currently missing in India. However, the mindset of the present age is changing very fast. The Constitution of India safeguards women's rights by putting her at par with men, socially, politically, and economically. Universal education has given her a new confidence. She has proved that she can equal men in all walks of life. She has come out of the four walls of the home. Women have proved to be better doctors, artists, administrators, academicians, and engineers than many of their counterparts. It's just the beginning. Much more is to be done. Crimes against women and exploitation of women will not be taken lying down by the more conscious, confident, and aggressive women in future. This paper highlights gender justice vis-a-vis crimes against women and the various laws made to upgrade and safeguard the dignity of women. As we all know, all over the world, 8th March is celebrated as an International Women's Day, but gender equality is proclaimed as fundamental right by UN Charter in 1945. Women and men are created by same creator. Their rights and duties are equally divided by him. Gradually, man started taking advantage of his strong physical power. As a result of this, the position of women was reduced to the mercy of men by imposing unreasonable customs upon women. With the progress of civilization, people started realizing this fact. Law came for the rescue of women. In India, also, traditional customs and usages were declared unconstitutional. There is still a need for improvement. At present, men are still under the impression that their position is very strong in the society. Women's struggle for equality in the society is backed by the law and to some extent by the right thinking people in the society. Gender injustice is not a recent phenomenon. Crimes against women have been committed since antiquity. Women are superior. not equal to men. It is not the men who have not treated the woman equally, but nature itself has treated the woman in different ways and made them biologically different. Some person calls the woman as inferior, but it's not so. In fact, women are not equal to men, but superior. They shouldn't be treated equal in any sense. Woman is the power of man. Similarly, every powerful man is having the hands of woman behind his success. Women have one natural and extraordinary right, that's to give birth to child, which is given by nature. If woman is having extra efficiency than a man, no one must say that she is inferior. Woman was neither inferior nor equal, but always superior. So far as the gender injustice is concerned, it's a global issue. Gender-based discrimination is the global issue with varying degree and very old. It's travesty of all canons of social justice and equity that women who constitute half of the world's population and who work two-thirds of world working hours should earn just one-tenth of the world's property and also should remain victim of inequality and injustice. The first World Conference on Women Equality was held, and then Honorable Prime Minister of India, Srimati Indira Gandhi, also participated in that. It inspired a movement that has helped reduce gender inequality worldwide. Illiteracy among women is declining, and more women are participating in the labor force than ever before. However, the ground reality is that equality of opportunity of status for women is more in the books than in the moods of the community. The dignity of woman leaves much to be desired. She is still bonded laborer, gang rape victim, damsel for sale in weekly markets in the backward provinces, or to foreigners as bride for a price. The process of gender justice, broadly speaking, covers rights of women against exploitation and victimization. Today, the fact is that women's exploitation is a reality and gender justice a fragile myth. Though law and policy, women have indeed over the years secured for themselves many entitlements, but so far they have not been able to defend themselves from crimes committed against them or social prejudices. This negates the whole premise of gender justice. Unless we recognize her rights, her basic human rights, gender justice would be a lip service with no tangible results. Let me quote here Krishna Iyer Just's quote, "The fight is not for women's status, but for human worth. The claim is not to end inequality of women, but to restore universal justice. The bid is not for loaves and fish for the forsaken gender, but for cosmic harmony, which never comes till woman comes." Despite having laws, the position of Indian women vis-a-vis her life and safety is not good. Constitution of India, law of crimes, and special and local laws provide a security to the woman, but does it apply in its letter and spirit? Article 42 directs the state to make provisions for just and humane conditions of work and maternity relief. Besides, Article 14 lays down that women should be given equal opportunities in the matter of public employment. In order to uplift the woman, Article 15, subsection 3 makes a special provision enabling the state to make affirmative discrimination in favor of women. The concern for upliftment of women can be seen in directive principles of state policy. Besides, various penal laws necessary protection to the woman. But the crime rate graph and conviction rate shows that this crime rate or the crime against women are still on rise. Women and the law. To uphold the constitutional mandate, the state has enacted various legislative measures to ensure equal rights, to counter social discrimination and various forms of violence against women, such as we have the Family Courts Act of 1954, the Special Marriage Act of 1954, Hindu Marriage Act of 1955, the Hindu Succession Act of 1956 with amendment in 2005, Immoral Traffic Prevention Act of 1955, the Maternity Benefit Act of 1961, amended in 1995, Dowry Prohibition Act of 1961, the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act of 1971, the Prohibition of Child Marriage Act of 2006, the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence. There has been a demand from various women rights groups that women should be given reservation in parliament and institutions of local self-government. Accordingly, the Constitution's 73rd Amendment was passed by Parliament in 1992 to ensure that one-third of total seats may be resumed for women in all elected offices of local self-government, current laws to prevent gender injustice. We have bills also to prevent sexual harassment at workplace. The Rajya Sabha on February 26, 2013 approved the amended Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Bill. The bill seeks to provide protection to women in unorganized and organized sectors, including the private sector. We have Ordinance on Crimes Against Women, and which was okayed by the Honorable President Mr. Pranab Mukherjee, who gave his assent to the bill on February 3, 2013, stipulating tougher punishment for perpetrators of crime against women. The ordinance has been cleared by the Union Cabinet on February 1, 2013. We have new United Nations framework for combating violence against women. In a significant development, various desperate quarters came together at the United Nations on March 15, 2013 to initiate a framework for combating violence against women. Western nations, Islamic countries, and others, including India, showed a rare solidarity in putting place the mechanism that will go a long way in mitigating atrocities on women, regardless of differences in socio-cultural and religious norms across nations. The Commission on Status of Women announced the historical accord at the United Nations headquarters in New York, drawing widespread cheers from representatives of most countries. The Commission garnered special applause for being able to make the diverse members agree to the declaration that violence against women could not be justified by any custom, tradition, and religious consideration. At a time when rape and other forms of violence are dominating headlines across the world, the adoption of the accord came as significant victory for women's rights. Let me conclude my paper. I would like to conclude it. The message of international instruments, such as Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women 1979 and the Beijing Declaration, which directs all state parties to take appropriate measures to prevent discrimination of all forms against women, besides taking steps to protect and honor dignity of women, is loud and clear. The International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights contains several provisions that are particularly important for women. Unfortunately, however, there has been no improvement during the last 2 decades. The discrimination stems not so much from legislative insufficiency as from attitudinal bias of the society. Contemporaneous legislation, laws, treaties, and conventions have unequivocally established equal rights for men and women as a global norm. In spite of all this, discrimination continues and continues, but it can be attributed to the deep rooted social values in an essentially male dominated society. Awakening of collective conscience is the need of the day. Change of heart and attitude is what is needed. If women were to receive education and become economically independent, the possibility of many pernicious social evils dying a natural death may or may not remain a distant dream. Laws are not enough to combat the growing menace of gender injustice. A wider social movement of educating women of their rights is what is needed. Human rights for all must be made the focus point in good governance to ensure progress of nation and usher in a just and caring society. There can be no doubts about the inevitability of the human right regime as the foundation of a good valued based society, but for human rights take a backward step if gender justice is not achieved. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Asma. You've come up with a good paper. We have been discussing about this collective consciousness throughout different papers. Now, I have a question for you. Can I ask?
Yes, ma'am, please.
Yeah, so you have spoken about how notions of justice it shapes gender identity. I wanted to ask you whether the legal justice system, whether it privileges notions of gender, or is it itself gendered?
But so far as the legal framework is concerned, if we talk about the legal justice, we have many provisions so far as the Constitution of India is concerned, which protects the dignity of the woman. Like I have just given a description in my paper also, that even the Constitution of India has permitted to make a protective discrimination again, which means that we can even make a law in favor of a woman which can be against a man. We can make a protective discrimination against women. So we have the laws under Constitution of India. We have the penal provisions which are making the punishment for crimes against women very stringent. But the thing is, in spite of having all the legal norms, having the penal laws, having the other constitutional sanctity being governed to uplift the dignity of women, what is not present in our society is the society itself. Society itself, we have laws, but we don't have the proper enforcement agencies which are there to implement the laws, are which are there to safeguard the dignity of the woman. We have laws, laws are meant, laws are there in the books only. Implementation is like lacking. The social attitude of looking towards the woman, that is lacking. That is where we the Indian nation is lacking.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Asma. Do any of the participants want to ask a question? Okay. Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Asma, for presenting your paper. Wishing you
Thank
the
you to
very
also
best.
Ibrahim. Thank you so much for patient hearing.
Yeah. Thank you. Now we are moving on to the next participant. The next participant is Anu Devdas RD. She's a research scholar from the Institute of English, University of Kerala. The title of her paper is Catch-22 Conundrum, a social constructionist view of gender stereotyping in 10th standard SCRT Kerala Malayalam textbooks. I welcome you, Anu, to present your paper. Wishing you the very best.
Thank you, ma'am. Is my screen visible?
Yes, it is.
So my topic is Catch-22 Conundrum, a social constructionist view of gender stereotyping in 10th standard SCRT Malayalam textbooks. So let me introduce to the background of this paper. Kerala is a land lauded for an inspiring political past, social and cultural reform movements, unique geographical features, medicinal and healthcare system, literacy rate, female to male ratio, etc. But in the matters of gender sensitivity, Kerala had a background of tyrannical social institutions and practices like matrimony, joint family system, dowry system, sati, Charnar revolt, Smartha Vicharam, and a multitude of religious, caste, or class related oppression where women were hegemonized, discriminated, objectified, punished, violated, and sexualized. In the annals of Kerala history, we see women as weak, constrained, subservient, physically vulnerable beings without any political or financial rights. Though the social reforms and the course of time erased most of the harsh institutions prevalent in the society, the oppression and subordination towards the other continued through cultural structures like religion, family, education, arts, which enable the perpetual reinforcement of the inequality in Kerala's cultural fabric. It is within this patriarchal, male-oriented cultural framework that discourses such as cinema, drama, music, painting, literature, etc. flourish. The textbooks followed by students in educational institutions are no exception from this dark, male-dominated cultural backdrop. These cultural texts parallel and duplicate real-life power struggles between genders. These texts have an inevitable role in naturalizing the oppression through the stereotypical representation of women. Now, moving on to my theoretical framework, I have used the concept of gender stereotype Judith Butler's concept of gender as performance, and also Simone de Beauvoir's social constructionist view of gender. So, gender stereotyping has a profound and unpropitious impact on our society, resulting in inequality between the sexes and misconceptions about gender roles as inflexible. Um, the definition of gender stereotype would be: a gender stereotype is a generalized view or preconception about attributes or characteristics or the roles that are or ought to be possessed by or performed by women and men. Now, Simone de Beauvoir's social constructionist view of gender opines that particular meanings were attributed to women according to the biological function they perform. Thus, a woman who is capable of childbearing is attributed with the value of motherhood. It becomes a symbol of the true female, and it becomes the central role for the woman to perform. It leads to the misconception that nurturing a child is the woman's natural job. It is through these socialization processes by the patriarchy that women are subordinated and are relegated to feminine roles and are sidelined from the mainstream subjectivities. Judith Butler's concept of gender as performance is very relevant in interpreting how gender and its meaning is constructed through repeated performances. Clothing, mannerisms, speech, and language are all signs that bodies use to declare their gender to the world. As she puts it in her Gender Trouble, identity is performatively constituted by the very expressions that are said to be its results. These expressions are discourses and representations. It is through recurrent iterations of these expressions in literature and other cultural contexts that women assimilate to values that make them fit into the category of femininity. A woman becomes a woman or possesses a woman's identity because she plays the role of a woman repeatedly. So it is the biological determinism that women are biologically weak, less efficient, and her purpose is only for procreation and nurture. And also the repeated citation of women in particular gender roles that forces them to continue in their oppressed state. These socialization processes through which women are subordinated have to be rejected on the grounds that gender is socially constructed. The traditional notion of the fixity of gender roles and an essential approach to conform to standard practices has to be negated with a feministic understanding of these signs. Education is a powerful agency through which women could strive for emancipation from the clutches of patriarchy and biological essentialism, thus invalidating the subordination meted out against women. But if such a discourse, that is the education system that I'm mentioning here, promotes gender stereotyping, the agency itself becomes its opposing force. The escape from that vicious circle seems unaffected. When society is evolving and celebrating different subjectivities and the textbooks continue to normalize the patriarchal tendencies, a catch-22 situation occurs from the standpoint of the students. A catch-22 situation is a paradoxical situation in which conflicting ideologies oppose each other. Now, moving on to my objective and methodology. This paper explores how the Malayalam textbooks prepared and revised in 2019 by the SCRT with the aim to acknowledge the students about the skillful and artistic utilization of mother tongue disseminates a subject matter that promotes gender stereotyping. The paper has made use of Simone de Beauvoir's social constructionist view of gender and Judith Butler's gender as performance to validate the objective. A detailed analysis of some of the chapters included in these texts will help in demonstrating how gender stereotyping is still administered along with the first language acquisition. The quotation that I have used in this PPT are translated by me itself. Now, analysis of the primary text. The 10th standard Malayalam textbook has two parts, Kerala Padavali and Adisthana Padavali. Kerala Padavali textbook has a total of 5 units with 3 chapters in each, and Adisthana Padavali textbook has 3 units consisting of 3 to 4 chapters in each. This text could be cited as the gloomiest example of the marginalization of the female voice, because out of the 24 chapters that are incorporated into the student's curriculum, there is only a single chapter that is written by a female author. And that single piece, written by Lalitambika Andarjanan, was incapable of representing women's subjectivity, as her writings were influenced by the established norms of patriarchy, biological determinism, and gender stereotyping. So, so we'll go to the detailed analysis of one of the chapters that I have taken for study. So Ridu Yogam taken from Abhignana Shakuntalam, written by the great poet Kalidasa, is a chapter included in the first unit of Kerala Padavadi. This chapter details the portion where the star-closed lovers Dushyanta and Shakuntala, who had been separated by the curse of anger-prone Durvasa at the hermitage of sage Kashyapa, after discovering the signet ring he had given her. So Abhignana Shakuntalam is undoubtedly considered a masterpiece of Kalidasa. But this supposed to have been composed before or during the 4th century, when the society was deeply patriarchal. Shakuntala is portrayed as a meek and demure girl who succumbs to her sexual desire at the sight of the king of Hastinapura. She doesn't oppose the king over his erratic remarks. Also, the salacious words that he uses doesn't stir her up. She doesn't put any precondition, and she is depicted as a naive girl who don't even dare defend against the vilification of the king in the royal court. But at the end of the play, Shakuntala readily accepts Dushyanta's invitation for her reunion without any hesitation, though she had to suffer a lot of trials and tribulations when he abandoned her. Now, when she sees Dushyanta after a long time, she stutters at the sight of the king, and but the king himself tells her how she should feel. Here, the voice of the woman is denied. The king says, the tears would choke you, sweet in vain. My soul with victory is fed. Because I see your face again, no jewels, but the lips are red. Here, the king himself tells her how she should feel. She should be flowing happy tears for him rather than be angry with him after meeting after a long period of time. Now, Kalidasa drags our attention to the demeanor of Shakuntala as to how a love-lost woman should be, as having a pale, worn face, careless dress, single braid, without jewels. Dushyanta doesn't care about the words she slipped between her tongue, but only the beautiful red lips she has. Kashyapa blesses Dushyanta with an invincible power to win battles and to rule the earth, and praises his valor and skill in archery, which equals to that of Indra. On the other hand, Shakuntala is given the attributes like beauty, faithfulness, honesty, piety, rightfulness, and self-sacrifice. Now, finally, Marijan asks Shakuntala how could he bless her more when she already has a husband who has indomitable strength strength like that of Indra, and a son who is equivalent to that of Jayanta. So these dialogues indicates the deterministic and inflexible performances attributed to both genders in ancient times that are still instilled in students reading and learning, avoiding a feministic understanding of the text or the social conditions during that time. I'll take you to another chapter that is mentioned in this text. This is and it is Vishwarupam, written by the writer and social activist Lalitambika Antarjanam, which recounts the life of Kadatha Kunnikutti Amma and how her identity as a Malayali woman underwent westernization to become Mrs. Talath or Dolly when she married a diplomat who worked abroad. The story revolves around Mrs. Talath and Sudhir, the former secretary of her husband, and her narration of the lessons that she learned from her life when her husband died. Mrs. Talath is depicted as a representative of the Indian woman who lost her cultural morals and values when she got westernized. She is portrayed as a woman who helped her husband in official duties, who gave more attention to guest rooms, clubs, and opera houses than to her 4 children. Since she tries to maintain an equal status quo with her husband, she is represented as a rich, modern, headstrong lady. Now, this story accentuates the traditional notion that the primary and the essential purpose of a woman is procreation and childcaring. It derives from the draconian patriarchal idea that motherhood is the natural and original form of womanhood. It presents 2 kinds of women: a woman who prioritizes her independence and a woman who is confined to the domestic duties following the path of tradition. Now, this narrative institutionalizes the skewed viewpoint that the latter woman is the prototype of Kerala's cultural society. Now, at the end of the story, Mrs. Talathi is illustrated as a woman who regrets her past for neglecting her motherly duties. It is vividly shown in the advice that she gives to Sudhir before he goes abroad. So she says to Sudhir, Sudhir, you must remember one thing. You must tell your future wife that your children shouldn't be sent to boarding schools. You should tell her that servants shouldn't be kept to take care of your children. Their mother herself should take care of them. She must call them, pamper them, and be friends with them. Only then a mother will be part of a child's life and vice versa. You should teach her this lesson, only then she will be happy. These subjectivities promote stereotypical roles and cement the traditional conceptualization that gender is biologically determined. Now, being a crusader against the inequalities and injustice towards the Nambudiri community and a writer who shaped Kerala's feminist literature, even Lalitambika Andarjanam's take on womanhood was distorted. Because, as Christine Rochford, a feminist critic, noted, women's literature is, in a sense, the literature of the colonized. So even the women's thought process was infiltrated by the mainstream cultural orthodoxy that a break free from this cultural consciousness is almost impossible. Since I don't have much time, I'll be skipping the other two stories that I have taken. So okay. So most of the stories and poems are all narrated by a male narrator or written by a male author, whether it be Lakshmana Sandhanam by Ezhuthachan, Kadal Theerathu by O.V. Vijayan, Pralobanam by Unnai Variyar, Yuddhathinte Parinamam by Kuttikrishna Varar, Atmavinte Velipadugal by Perumbadam Sridharan, etc. The narratives are scrutinized. It is clear that the female voice, her expressions or subjectivities are silenced or marginalized. In Yan Kadagarnaya Kada by S.K. Pottekad and Amma Total by Rafiq Ahmed, we see gender stereotyping where the daughter-in-law persuades her husband to abandon her mother or leave her in an old age home. In Pottekad's short story, the writer himself becomes the mouthpiece of a woman. He writes letters on behalf of a mother whose son abandoned her. Now, another interesting thing that I found in most of these stories is the concept of domestic femininity. Domestic femininity, that is associating the femininity with interiority and domesticity, is very common in patriarchal societies such as Kerala. Moving on to my conclusion, these androcentric narratives continue to propagate patriarchal ideologies which would negate the progress that our present society is going through. Social values, norms, and attitudes of the modern developed society starkly contrast with that of the ancient ones. The chapters that were examined bring forth the biased social outlook and cultural domination against women. Thus, the leitmotif of this paper is to call for the revision in the curriculum that promotes gender equality. Now, I have also mentioned some solutions for this. A panoramic view into the upheavals of feministic tendencies in Kerala suggests that there is a whole forgotten generation of defined Malayali writers from the late 19th and early 20th centuries, like K. Saraswati, who is called as the Vattu Saraswati, and T.P. Rajalakshmi, Madhavikutty or Kamala Das, Sarah Joseph, etc., who were active both in the political as well as the literary arena, who made strides in the world and became trouble for patriarchy. They became the torchbearers of the feminist underpinnings and doggedly portrayed strong feminine characters through their short stories. They gave a clarion call for the indignities women underwent, portrayed how the self-dignity of women is smudged and tarnished by the male chauvinistic view, and protested all forms of confinement and suppression. Several new generation women writers who emerged in the 20th century also dealt with feminism with a modern perspective. It included writers like Gracie, Ashida, Geeta Hiranyan, Chandramati, Vijay Lakshmi, K.R. Meera, Priya A.S., Khadija Muhammad, Mumtaz, and J. Devika, and others. So, the insertion of narratives of women and a briefing of the historicity of these texts into the curriculum could be considered as an antidote to this conundrum. Still, it will be a representation of the gender binary if the LGBTQ community is overlooked. So an LGBTQ plus inclusive education curriculum that increases their visibility and celebrates the gender diversity will help to create more awareness about different gender identities, and it will also help to build a positive environment for teaching and learning experience. So that's all about it. I have also included some images that are used in these texts, um, which promotes gender stereotyping. So here, the male characters are portrayed with the male characters are depicted as very strong, and the female characters as weak, or they are mostly shown in domestic environment.
Yes, Anu. Thank you so much. It is indeed a wonderful. It is a wonderful presentation. I think to start off, we need to turn the gender stereotypes on their head completely, and we need to challenge them repeatedly to an extremity, so that it is always there for children to see, right? Or
Yes.
maybe for the next 50 years. We should never make a mother cook in illustrations, and maybe we should make the father cook, and maybe then only, especially in illustrations, and maybe things will start to change. I have a question for you.
Yes, ma'am.
um, can you find a definite sign of regression in Kerala's famously progressive cultural fabric? Like we call, whenever we speak about Kerala, we speak about how our literacy level is 100%. Do you see that there is a sign of regression in Kerala?
Um, Ma'am, can you elaborate a bit more?
We have educated people over here. We call ourselves 100% literate, but these educated people themselves are coming and making the syllabus of the children. So, do you see that there is a sign of regression? We
Yes, I
call
think
ourselves we call ourselves progressive.
yes.
Do you think that there is a sign of regression?
Yes, I think so, because as I have already mentioned in my paper, there is a vicious circle in here. The gender stereotyping thing is actually carried out from one generation to another, and though there is some kind of development in society, but there isn't much difference in the text that they study. It is still
So
gender
what can
stereotyping.
be done?
So that is why I presented this paper, and I mentioned that a revision in the curriculum is actually needed, and also the parents must tell their children how different gender identities are there in the society.
Okay, okay. Thank you. Now we have a question for you from one of the participants. Ankita, I think you have a question for her. She raised her hand. Ankita, Anki, do you have a question for Anu?
No, ma'am. Sorry, by mistake.
Yeah, okay. Uh, Thank you so much, Anu.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Wishing you the
Thank you
very
so much.
best. Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Now we are moving on to our third participant. Uh, Our third paper presenter is Shirley Matthew, Assistant Professor from DJ Sanghvi College of Engineering, Mumbai. The title of her paper is Feminist Consciousness in Contemporary Writings of Naga Women, an Analysis of the Many That I Am by Angula Zo Long Kumar. So I invite you, Shirley, to present your paper, wishing you the very best.
Thank you. Can you see my slide?
No.
Okay, I've already shared it. I'll just try again.
Yeah.
Can you see it now? Is my slide visible?
Yes, it is. Well, now it's not.
My meetings.
What about now?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. So my topic, the title of my paper is Feminist Consciousness in Contemporary Writings of Naga Women. I have selected the work The Many That I Am by Anungla Zoe Longkumar for an analysis. Why I selected this particular work? Well, actually, I've always been interested in indigenous literature, especially in the stories of women. So, in this particular work, The Many That I Am, it's a collection of stories, and each of these stories speaks of the many journeys of the Naga women who undertake them to reclaim their past and reconcile their complex present through their own experiences and insights. So that's what fascinated me towards this work. So a slide, an overview of the presentation. So I would just be briefly giving you an introduction. Then I would be talking about the Naga community and the challenges faced by their women. So especially I would be looking at violence within the homes and outside the homes, two different types of violence that these women are subjected to, their struggle for education, and basically I would be looking at storytelling, which is used as a medium to express themselves. And finally, the conclusion of this paper. So to begin with section 1, that is the introduction. The Many That I Am is a genre-defying book by Anungla Zoe Longkumar. The spread of literary genres in this anthology reflects many a stories that describe the world of women in Nagaland, from the struggles of a peasant to a modern-day college-going Naga woman. About an introduction about the author, Anungla Zoe Longkumar. That's her picture to the right-hand side on the top. She is best described as a free individual, discovering her way through creative pursuits in music, writing, filmmaking, and folk traditions. She is the author of Folklore of Eastern Nagaland, which comprises of translations of folk tales, folk songs, and real-life accounts collected from the 6 tribes who inhabit the remote districts of Eastern Nagaland. Now to introduce the concept of feminist consciousness, which I have taken for this particular paper. This is by Gerda Lerner in her work, The Creation of Feminist Consciousness from the Middle Ages to 1870. So this term is explained by her, wherein she talks about feminist consciousness as an awareness of women that they belong to a subordinate group. And the members, and as members of this group, they have suffered a lot of wrongs. And they also recognize that their subordination is not natural, but it is societally determined. They also talk about a development of a sense of sisterhood. And she talks about the autonomous definition of women, of their goals and strategies for changing their condition, and also a development of an alternate vision of the future. So all this is incorporated in this particular book that I have taken for analysis. Section 2. Now, after the introduction, moving on to section 2, which talks about the Naga community and the challenges which are faced by their women. To give a brief background of the Naga community, the Naga people are an ethnic group of several tribes native to northeastern part of India. They follow patriarchal social norms, and hence men folk take over superior roles in decision making both in their homes and in the community. In the work, Longkumar, the author, she mentions in the introduction how in many of the writings, the theme of introspection, looking at ourselves in a more critical way is reflected. She also talks about the feminine or feminist voice, which questions the continued domination of the male over the female and the constant helplessness endured by women in the patriarchal society of the Nagas. Now, in one of the poems in this particular anthology, which is I Wish You Were a Man, this shows the frustration of the woman at the gender discrimination, and it could be the entire voice echoed by the community as such, the women in the community. I wish you were a man. If you were a man, you'd be you, not an identity borrowed from your father or your husband. You'd be you, voicing out what matters as a human, not merely a woman. But you're only a woman, and that's the problem. We can't listen, no matter how wise your words. Woman, what a waste you weren't born a man. Examining the violence which women experience within and outside their homes. In one of the short stories, My Mother's Daughter, the narrator portrays the cycle of violence which starts first with the father and then continues with her husband. The passive conditioning given to her by her mother with the words, "No, child, he doesn't hate us. He was drunk, that's all. You know, he does this only when he gets drunk at night. It's not his fault. It's because of the alcohol." This conditioning ensures that the child remains in the passive position and accepts the physical battering from her father and later on from her husband without protest. In another short story, The Power to Forgive, stirrings of dissent is here seen, unlike the earlier story. In the narrative of the silent fight of a girl who was raped by her paternal uncle at the tender age of 12. In another short story, Willie's Runaway Son, the character Willie, her trauma begins when her son joins an underground faction and later runs away with a gun costing 2 lakhs and joins another group. Since her son was seen as a betrayer, her husband was abducted and she was asked to arrange for 2 lakhs, failing which her husband would be shot dead. Willie's husband was a cough syrup addict who rarely worked. Willie did not have a regular job but ran the household by doing odd jobs occasionally. The struggle she has to undergo to raise the money and the bleak future that lies ahead of her depicts the plight of most women in this war-torn state. So here we see that women face this kind of a violence not only within their home, but they also are repercussions of violence from outside, which is reflected in their domestic household. Looking at the struggle for education that these women undergo, Gerda Lerner speaks about how women were forced for hundreds of years not only to argue for their right for equal education, but first to prove their capacity to be educated at all. This idea is seen in the story When Doors Open. Here, quietly defying her grandfather's objection, her grandmother discreetly makes arrangements so that her mother could attend the night school without the knowledge of her grandfather. So we see how women are quietly and subtle in their own ways taking a stand against patriarchal norms. In another short story, Outbooks, the narrator expresses how, even though she was allowed an education, there were only 2 kinds of books that were approved of, the Bible and the school textbooks. And this was applicable especially for young girls. So how do women come out of this kind of subjugation that they are facing? One of the important ways or techniques which women manage to express themselves is through storytelling. Gerda Lerner also talks about how creativity becomes a vehicle and instrument by which women can emancipate themselves intellectually to a level from which they can climb out of the confines of the structures of patriarchal hierarchy. This is beautifully seen in the story, The Storyteller, where all the narrator ever wanted was to become a storyteller like this woman, Otsula. She is completely enamored by Otsula's ability to weave the words into captivating stories and how every retelling brought a new dimension to the stories. Otsula, the storyteller, wants to leave her stories behind with someone who knows their value, and she gives her pot of stories to the narrator. The narrator very beautifully expresses: the pot of stories took time to brew, but slowly and steadily I found my voice. I told you I used to be a shy girl, but when I told stories, I became a different person. I became more alive through the telling of my stories. So here we can see how stories are used by women to express themselves. And in Northeast, we see a lot of women who have written, who are authors. So this is one of the way in which they are expressing themselves. So, finally, in conclusion, I would say that though most of these writings are not overtly feminist, there is an emerging consciousness of what it means to be a woman and an underlying discontent with the unjust treatment meted out to her by society. The hardworking, brave, resilient Naga woman is battling a tough battle and a double marginalization. Firstly, as a woman against the male dominated forces in her community, and secondly, as an indigenous woman who is at the farthermost margins of society. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shirley. Uh, when I looked up this work, I saw that the first reason that you should read this book is because all the artists that worked on this book, all the writers, the editors, the graphic designers, everyone, it's by women, right? That's the first thing that I got to know when I looked up this book. Okay. Now, when we speak about this particular book. You can see that many facets of life in Nagaland is discussed, especially the cultural history. So, do you think that this work is about claiming back one's roots?
Yes, definitely. In one way, it is about claiming back. That is why they're looking back. The only way to express themselves is to rewrite history in some way. So, for that, they have to revisit history and they have to look at how they have been represented. So, in so many ways, through different kind of, it's a collection of poems, short stories. There are these paintings also which are there, which are a part of this book. So it is a way of actually looking back, going back to history and reclaiming, their stories for themselves. And even the story that I mentioned of where, this narrator is so fascinated by the storyteller, because she understands that stories are one way, women can express their side of what they have undergone, their experiences, which probably cannot be experienced or expressed as well by men.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being part of this paper presentation. Now, do any of the participants want to ask a question? Okay. So thank you, Shirley. Wishing you the very best.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Now we are moving on to our next paper presenter. Our next paper presenter is Vikram Singh Bhadoria, a research scholar from the Social Work Department, Guru Ghatas Vishwavidyalaya, Bilaspur, Chhattisgarh. And the title of the paper is Study of Legal Aspects and Health Conditions of Transgender Population of India. I welcome you, Vikram, for your paper presentation and wishing you the
Yes,
best.
ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon, ma'am. Are you able to listen me?
Yes.
Yeah, it's my immense pleasure to present my paper in international conference here. I will share my screen.
Yes.
Is it visible, ma'am?
Yes, it is visible.
Yeah, my topic is the study of legal aspect and health condition of transgender population of India, and there is a table of content that I will go through the. I will start with the introduction and end with the conclusion and differences, and the introductions. The I will start with the famous quote of Alan Cohen. I know I am a transgender person because my brain knows it's female and not my body disagrees. Alan Cohen. Actually, it's a eco problem. I think so. Hello, hello.
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, okay, ma'am. Transgender is a term, firstly used in English by the John Elvin in 1965. Later, it was displaced by the word transsexual. Transgender actually defined as it relates to a gender identity which does not conform the conventional belief of either male or female. They are known as cross-gender or joint-gender. The Western term transgender is an umbrella term actually. It is used to several group different kinds of people who don't conform to their expected gender and are living the gender that was not assigned to them at birth, and also those who live gender which is not the traditional conception of gender. And the population in India is a close group with a religious culture and rich historical background. The transgender population in India is possibly best well known and third type of sex in the modern world. And after the Supreme Court declared its transgender as third gender, the third gender is India has emerged the strong faction in the LGBT rights. And the why my research is important, I will go to the some facts. Uh, the World Health Organization has defined health as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. And in a transgender health, transgender are mostly suffered from the HIV infections. Address the health issues of transgender seeks immediate attention. So and after implementing the law enacted by the Supreme Court to get this community included in the mainstream society and to get aware of the discrimination in healthcare system. Actually, this community face discrimination even in the healthcare, basic healthcare facilities also. After the Supreme Court of India in its poignant judgment by the justice issued certain direction to the central and state government where the Hijra should be treated as gender for the purpose of safeguarding their fundamental rights that's mentioned in the constitution. And there is a various type of transgender in India. Kotis is actually it's a heterogeneous gathering that incorporate both same sex. And Jogappas is an ancient word actually, which are committed to fill as a worker of goddess. Shiv Shaktis are considered as guys which are moved especially near a goddess or who have ladylike sex articulation. Actually, and the last one is Hijras. People who intentionally look for inception into Hijra people group whose conventional calling is Badai gift or applauding or looking for ad in the literature review. I examined some of the research work which earlier happened. One of the study of the Dhananjay Sri Gunjawala and Radis B. Kumar that focus on the knowledge and attitude toward transgender community, and the Vandekar JR and Nigdukar AS they focus on the mental health in India. In Article 14, 15, and 19, these articles are mentioned in the Indian Constitution. They provides equal rights. To all the people, including transgender also. And the one other study is of Arvinda and Titu Savin that no country for transgender. This paper is also focused on the transgender person bill that enacted in 2015. And the lastly one is a Brown and Clark thematic analysis. The study was used to consider how participants describe their sexual orientation. And some of the research, some of the literature reviews which I focused also on the so sampling technique I use here is gathered information from the various sources. So I use purposive greatest variety strategy was utilized here by choosing the example to nullify the weaknesses of non-proven inspecting, acquiring most extreme heterogeneous because these transgender population actually most heterogeneous population we usually can't access to them. So trans people geographical spread instructional linkage with Gharanas framework expert actually the research from my to previous work actually There is a well-being and social consideration. From the above writing, we can break down that transsexual well-being related explosion is simply restricted to HIV, AIDS, or emotional. Actually, previous studies also only restricted to HIV or emotional well-being, but my study is somewhat elaborate to that. The trans individual explain issue the getting to administration they need to opportunity and delicate way. Existing arrangement that have zeroed in trans individual who have gone to the plan through sex reassignment treatment. They said implied that the necessities of some gathering or trans individual have been dismissed, and the legitimate care. After the enactment of the act, there is a way, there we should focus on the uh, legitimate care. To examine the past accrual, we can expect that work has started on the mapping perspective towards trans individual by legislation. There is need to deliberately quantify changing mentalities from basic to upwards community towards trans individual, and so there are some various facts that focus on the research gap is law enforcement and the legal system, healthcare need, society mental health issues, and HIV. The objective which I focus here is that to understand the health issues looked by transgender people in India, to survey nature of soundness of ground of transsexual individual, to know legal view about transgender, find out the lacuna of the privileges of the transsexual people bill act of 2015, and how to implement Nansal judgment rule here. The methodology I use here is some of that sources of data. Essential sources are you I use here. I gather information straightly forward from the witnesses by accomplishing serious field work. And optional sources are I also used, and most of the information for explore have been gathered from auxiliary sources. I like was gathered from optional sources, related book, article, diaries, and so on. I remember for auxiliary sources. I have gathered information from the web and utilize entirely for the strategy moreover. And the research design I use here per mixed method research design shall be used for the broad purpose of breadth and depth of understanding the transgender user. Use purposes sampling here, and is actually non-probability of sampling. I use here purpose sampling and normal sampling for data collection. Because of the inaccessible transgender population, a purpose sampling method shall be preferred here. In the data collection instrument, the study collected qualitative data from the participant utilizing an interview. The question in the interview related to various experiences of the population related to health, legal aspect, family support, romantic relationship, mental health, and legal rights also. And the discussion which I came to the research paper after analyzing that the any gender specific health needs for the transgender community varies from the earth to sky. It is difficult to have one short direct answer. As a member of the community share the health problem of the transgender will be more than a normal human being. Of many of them undergo different surgeries and procedure to create an alignment of their bodies with their mind some. Now they are study we say that the trans people are prone to all disease that they identify with. That means the trans woman is more prone for all disorder that women are prone to. Trans men to all those which men are prone to. So thus the anatomy should be changed. And the special healthcare need don't specify start from health only, but there are many precursor also. For the transgender community began right from the recognition of gender from the basic right. To address that particular need should arise while approaching to healthcare provider for a hospital. Use of inclusive language in one example also. Actually my paper is actually bit long in 8,000 word, and I prescribe in a very short way actually. So I come here with the conclusion. From the above discussion, it is concluded that it is endeavor to implement the Supreme Court directive and other health related regulation to bring transgender to the mainstream community so that they can enjoy the basic rights also. They should be provided better healthcare facilities without any discrimination. There is need to spread larger awareness campaign with open arm in healthcare system in trans community. The road of the legal recognition, sorry, the road of the legal recognition of the transgender has been continued to be long and difficult route. After analyzing every legal aspect, transgender community should be given equal privileges and rights to address the effective mechanism to enforce the legal provision. Rights made for transgender community should be implemented fairly and properly so that they should not face inequality So some of the references which I use here is mentioned here. So there is a conclusion that I end with the presentation.
Thank you so much, Vikram. I have a question for you. Shall I
Yeah,
ask?
yeah.
Do you think the medical professionals themselves are largely uninformed about the gender identity issues?
Yes, ma'am. They should not unaware of the basic health facilities, the care facilities. Although transgender, they are deprived from the basic facility because the medical professional, in their medical studies of UG of MBBS, there is a not focus on this community. Actually, my elder brother is a medical professional. I asked to them also in their study, there is a not focus on this community issues.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. With that, we are coming to the end of this session. Do any of the participants have any comment, or do you want ask any question to Vikram B?
Hello,
So
ma'am.
thank you,
I'm
Vikram, for
Kulvinder.
joining. Yeah.
Thank
Okay.
you, ma'am. Thank you,
We have a
everyone.
question from Kulvinder.
Hello.
Yeah. Continue, Kulvinder.
Hello. Sorry, ma'am.
Yes.
I'm not listening.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
You
I
may
can.
ask your question.
Hello.
Kulvinder, do you have a question? Okay, I think there is a technical issue with. Okay, so Vikram, thank you so much for joining and
Okay,
wishing.
ma'am. Thanks, ma'am.
With that, we have come to the end of this session. Wishing all the participants who have joined here uh, the very best. Thank you for joining, and wishing all the paper presenters the very best as well.
Thank you, Joseph, for handling this section smoothly. I also thank all the participants for presenting their papers. Once again, thank you all. Have a great day ahead.